We're always somewhere in the middle, between a high and a low, an ending and whatever comes next, without having a plan for any of it. This is No Map Included. I'm Yessi Sanchez, and every episode is a conversation with someone who is going through a version of that middle, what they learned, what surprised them, and what kept them going. Today's conversation is with half of my production team of Chingona, a documentary that we're producing right now, with director Cedric Angeles and producer Karin Fittante. And last time on a meeting, we sort of just started talking about like choice or calling, like in a creative world. So that's really what I want to talk about. And then I also want to talk a little bit more about Chingona, what it is, where we are now, and the reality of documentary filmmaking. So welcome, Karin and Cedric. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for asking. Yeah, so happy to be here.
I want to jump right in to the first question. Maybe Cedric, if you want to start. When you started your creative career, was it kind of like a calling, or do you feel like there was just no other option but to start this career?
You know, I was born and raised in the Philippines, moved to Los Angeles in my teens. I went to high school there. So I think my background as an immigrant, really, the idea of doing something creative for a living is not even in the cards, right? You know, Dad never really talked about it. You know, we never talked about the arts. We never talked about anything creative at all, really, in terms of doing a job. You know, my thing was they were pushing to that I get a stable job, right? I mean, it's, you know, you move to this country to make a living, to make money. There's nothing to do with like following your calling in a lot of ways. But, you know, I stumbled on when I was in high school with this grip in Hollywood. His name is Mike Eva. He had a grip company. And I started working for him through my buddy and basically cleaning stands and stuff and all this movie stuff in the warehouse. But I was already taking pictures at that time. So I guess you could say that was a calling, a desire to do it. And so I figured, okay, maybe I could get into film somehow through images. You know, long story, I applied for art school. I studied photography, got into travel photography, which I really wanted to do, and moved to New York after that and just started shooting for magazines here and there. And this was like the 90s, early 2000s, right? So the heyday of magazines and publications and travel work was peaking. So I was all over the world, really, shooting and stuff like that. So I guess we could tie this into Chingona later, but I met the boxers in Mexico City, and I kind of, you know, the inclination to make a film and the story about their lives happened from there. But going back to the question of if it's a calling, gosh, I think creativity, there's a way to nurture it and there's a way to fight it back, right? I would love to just have a regular job, like the 9 to 5 that we talked about before. And after you clock off, you're done with the job. So creativity in a way and being, you know, whatever it is creatively, you work for yourself, you run a business, you know, there's an itch you have to scratch in a way to kind of express yourself in a way, whatever that would be, writing or acting, directing, taking pictures. And the funny thing is when I realized that I wanted to be a photographer, I kind of had this weight lifted off my shoulder, like, oh, I finally found it. Right. At that point, because, you know, before you were kind of meandering around doing jobs here and left and right that you figure out maybe I'll be happy with this and not. But I think I found that answer with photography. And I felt like, okay, you know, it's either this or bust at that point. Right. There's no backup, you know, and I feel like that worked for me because I was very hungry and there's no falling back into anything else. So I just went for it, which brings me to Karin because that's how I met her. It was in a photo shoot for Bon Appetit, I believe, right? Magazine, and was shot in Italy.
And that's a good segue to you, Karin, because you started in a magazine. Is that right?
I went to a private school in New York City where the emphasis was that you become a doctor or a lawyer. The more I tried to go in that direction, the unhappier I was. I really wanted to be involved with the visual, and I actually then went to Boston University as a film major. When I got back to New York, it was really difficult to find work. I was bartending for a while. And then I got this job as a photo researcher at a publishing company. And I really enjoyed it. And from there, I got a job as a photo editor at Spy magazine. From there, I just was basically a photo editor and then eventually a photo director at various magazines. My last full-time magazine position was at Men's Health. And I had reached the point where I was like, if I have to do one more story on how to get great abs, how to have better sex, and how to live longer, I was like, I'm going to shoot myself. And by that point, I had made enough contacts, that I was able to start freelancing. And then I wound up moving out to California because my husband, well, the man who's my husband now, we had broken up for like 7 years. We got back together and he had moved out here. He had lived out here when he was a kid. And there were no magazines out here. A friend of mine had told me that Bon Appetit was looking for a producer. And there's so much similarities between photo editing and producing. The one thing about photo editing that I really missed was it is more creative. Producing can be a lot more organizational and overseeing. But I got the job with Bon Appetit and they were sending me like everywhere, like Italy, Canada, France. And I really loved that. And then I met Cedric, and a few years later, he called me because he had a job and he needed a producer. And that's kind of how our relationship really started. And I really love working with Cedric because there's a few photographers and directors that I work with where they, let me brainstorm with them or like shoot out ideas or help with the shot list. And I enjoy that because to me, that's more of a creative side of thinking than just being like, okay, budgets, crew, travel. So it's been really cool. And I think, after I left Men's Health, I was just like, I never want to go back to a 9 to 5 again. I mean, not that it was really a 9 to 5 because I was still flying all over the place for work, but the bureaucracies of being in an office and the politics, I realized just did not suit my personality. And I mean, you're dealing with agents now, you're dealing with clients. So you always have to deal with that to a certain extent. But the thing that I love about producing is that I have a job and I'm like, okay, I feel like a missionary, like I'm jumping in, we get this done and then we're out. Whereas if you're like at a company, it's like, oh, okay, I'm here, like every day dealing with, this way it's like you're meeting different people. So I've really enjoyed that aspect.
That is really cool. It makes me really curious about freelancing. I know this is nothing we planned on talking about, but since I'm a freelancer now too, it like really, really scares me to be a freelancer. Did you have any sort of fear, like if jobs would be coming in or?
I mentioned I love the name of your podcast, Some Map Included. That's really what freelancing feels like. Right. I don't think anybody really understands it until they're deep into it. Right. Okay. I'll be a photographer. I could be a writer. I could be, I don't have a job. I'll work for myself. But, there's a major difference if you're single and you don't have a family. I have a family now. I have 2 kids. So there's a bigger pressure on to make a living. Right. Even I'm established as a photographer. I've been doing it for 20 plus years. But, there are still years where you're like, wow, why am I doing this? Because it's an ebb and flow situation, right? You're so busy one day and then next thing you know, you're just dead. The phone or there's no email for 2 months. You're like, what's going on? It's sleepless nights and stress. But I think the positives really overshadow that. You could work with people that you love, right? You're doing something that you truly love, right? If you're going to go freelance, do something that you love. That's my first advice, right? Don't do something freelance that you don't really like. You really have to be into it because it's going to test you, right? To keep going and to be successful in what this is about, right? You have to be hungrier than the next person. You could take off from work. You set your own vacations. I can take my kids to school. I can pick them up. I could say no to work if I don't want to. And then it basically satisfies a creative feeling that you have, right? Depending on what you wanted to do. And there are certain things you can follow, of course, as a freelancer, right? There's promotional stuff you could do. If you have a community, that helps a lot. If other friends who are photographers or directors or writers, or there's always something that they can advise you on. But yeah, I wouldn't be able to know what else to do, but to really be a freelancer, right? It's the idea of an office is not really in my cards. I mean, I have my own office and I wake up and make coffee and go to my desk and start working, right? But yeah, I love and hate it. It's a love and hate relationship, right? But I guess it goes for everything else. But the love part, the positive part of it, it overshadows really anything. And you have to find a partner who's That's the key too. If you are with somebody, you have to find somebody who understands that life, the good times is good, but when the bad happens, she or he has to be there for you to really support emotionally or even financially at that point.
So that is a part of safety net, but do you have another part of safety net as a freelancer since you've been doing it for so long? Or what do you do in that case?
Gosh, this is another topic we can go into, which is how the industry has changed so much, right?
Mm-hmm.
The advent of AI, the advent of social media. Everybody's a photographer now. There's this explosion of talent out there that nobody knew about until social media came. And I totally understand that. There's amazing photographers everywhere. So you have to kind of be ready for that. So with photography, there's ways to pivot. You could sell your work to stock. You could do fine artwork, right? You could sell your work as fine art. Some people even deviate on what their specialties are. Some people are just car photographers or food photographers, but there's a fine line now where you're basically, showing lifestyle for everybody, right? And then this brings us into video work. This is how the directing kind of started, which is this full circle for me of oh, I'm back into film. Because maybe I would say mid 2000, maybe 15 years ago, then video starts happening. This is when clients starts talking about video and asking for video and wondering what we could do. If you're taking photographs of somebody, can you please make videos as well? So when I first started, I love video and I wanted to direct. So I would do video for clients without them asking me. And I would say, hey, I got this video anyway. I shot this. You want to use it, And this is also when the iPad was big. And remember when all the magazines was to an iPad version, that kind of fizzled out actually, really. But there was no Instagram yet. But that's how it started for me. So that kind of got me this, next thing you know, it's like 60% photography and 40% motion. And then suddenly it's 50-50. And then, and so the motion works kind of really help generate work and income to you that supplement what you were losing with photography, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, there's ways to pivot around it, or you do something else completely different. I've been reading a lot of blogs and posts lately of people just quitting, especially with the film world. A lot of people are just not working right now. 60% of the film production is stopped, and it's pretty brutal.
I would have to concur with Cedric. The industry is really in flux right now. And the first big pivot when I was still at magazines in the 1999, 2000, 2001, that was when you really started to see that photographers who weren't able to adapt and incorporate that into their body of work started to get left behind. Everyone I speak with right now, after COVID, things kind of blew up and were crazy for about a year with work. And now everyone I know, from agencies to directors to photographers to producers, they're all saying that the year has really been up and down. I think the good thing to keep in mind when you're freelancing is that everything does go in cycles, and when you look back, you really can see these key milestones of certain stages as the industry progressed. And I was actually talking with someone the other day, and we were saying how a lot of agencies now are inputting all of their estimates into an AI, like Claude. Claude's become really big in the industry. And how, in that regard, I could see AI being beneficial because you're putting in certain usage, certain locations, certain requirements, and you can reference older bids or estimates to give you a better understanding of what licensing or usage you need to negotiate. But as far as the creative side of it, I don't think AI will ever be able to do that. I really don't. I think there's something artificial about it and inauthentic that does not come across with someone who's created film or video. And I'm kind of a film purist myself. We've been doing movie night out here where we project a movie, and the only criteria is it has to have been shot in film. And, you're really blown away when you see where we're at visually now and just the realness. I mean, I don't even know how to put it into words, but there's something about film that is just so much more raw and organic. And I remember at one point when I was at magazines, saturation. I think that's what it is. But you see how ad agencies will jump onto these trends and then it goes away. And I'm hoping to a certain extent, I think AI is here to stay, but I think in terms of the creative, maybe there will be that reversion to things that are, done in camera again, or that are more real. My husband was a set designer back in the day, and he said at one point, with CGI, everything was being done CGI. And then the company that he worked with, all of a sudden they went back and they're like, no, we want this built by hand. We want this crafted. So, again, I think costs will always play a big factor in that. And that may influence, if you can get it done faster and cheaper. But I think there will always be holdouts where, and you'll see that in the final product as well.
Definitely. Yeah, I 100% agree. And I think that is such a good point to bring AI into this conversation and like where it's going and so on. And I feel like it might even be a different genre. Like maybe people will want to consume AI things, but that can be a different genre. And I feel like I've already seen a lot more people creating and consuming human made things. Like I feel like you can see it on Instagram because I follow a lot of like content strategy things on social media, and like everything is AI and we're oversaturated with AI, and people are tired of it. People are tired of the AI slop. And so the trends that I've been seeing lately is like, you need to be authentic and human. And I think it's very beautiful that that is coming back so quickly, because I feel like people are also hungry for film, for example, or for sets that are human made and all of that. So I think yes, there is this like negative to it, but I'm very thankful that you're mentioning that it comes all in cycles, because sometimes it can look very grim and you feel like, oh, it's doomsday and I shouldn't even invest in my creativity. But you're right, everything comes in cycles, and so you should invest in your creativity.
Right. I think it's also a good point. When it's downtime, it's when you actually don't stop making work. Right. I feel like a lot of people, and I'm guilty of this, when you get so busy and you've got jobs back and forth, that it's easy to just kind of not do anything when you're not working. But I feel like then you have to go back to like, why were you doing this in the beginning? And it's really about, I don't want to call it personal work, but, you need to just be producing and creating, making short films or taking your camera out and doing a project that's here and there, making portraits, making landscapes, and that's super important. I feel like, I think to stay long in this business, and to be like constantly just working, I think your work has to grow. You can't stick and do the same thing you were doing 20 years ago, though I do have photographs that I love that I took in my early career. But I think the point was the idea of growing, right? Because, and that's when you don't stop getting inspired by other photographers, by other filmmakers, read books, right? And watch documentaries, it kind of inspires you like to go out and actually, oh, that project that I've been wanting to do, let me do that. When it's down, I think that's when you have to like really push yourself to say, okay, this is when the time I need to like do that project I always wanted to do. And it doesn't have to be expensive at all. I'm sure, everybody's trying to save money, but there's a way around it to be creative when there's nothing's going on. Perfect time to do it.
Yeah. Consume art as well. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, because being a fan of it is the most important thing, right? You're a fan of films and photography and books and writings and music. And then from there, you just jump off and, that's when I fill my well, I guess it's like kind of think about when it's empty, right? You look at things that you love and discover people that you never heard about, and I think that's super important.
I love that.
It's a great way to kind of stay up to date on who's shooting, on what's going on right now. Because the fun thing about this industry is that it is constantly changing. And I think any creative field is really like that. So you do always have to be evolving to a certain extent. And you also, it's like Cedric said, you really need to have discipline and perseverance. Because I find sometimes that I'm working more when I'm not working, just maintaining my contacts, keeping my name out there, talking with people. than if I was at a 9 to 5, so you have to try to have that balance. But again, when you have downtime, that doesn't mean you just stop doing anything either.
Right. The balance is so important, and when to shut the work mode off. That's hard. I still can't do that once in a while, like I find myself being in my office like at 11 at night. And I'm like, oh my God. I mean, yeah, it consumes you. It's all consuming, right? Because you don't stop thinking about it. You're constantly, the minute you wake up, you go, oh, what am I going to do today? I need to do this, do that. Yeah, it's constant. My wife and I used to, we've broken the rules a little bit, but we'd like shut down for the weekend, or don't check your email after 6 or 7 at least, right? Like let it go. Put the phones away. It's hard.
I definitely do too, especially now that I'm doing more podcast production. Yesterday after dinner, it was like, I don't know, it was already 9 p.m. and I was like, oh, I could do some more work. And then I was like, nope, it's 9 p.m.
Right.
You're winding down right now. I feel like I need to set, because it constantly, a thought pops into my head, and then I have a lot of work right now, which is great. But yeah, it's also a lot of unpaid work. Like you
Right.
said, Karin, like the administrative things, like staying in touch with your contacts and all of the invisible things. For me, I almost need to switch, like have a little mind shift, because I see, okay, these are the paid hours and this is all the administrative stuff that I have to do. And I almost see that as like, this is like unpaid, so it's not a priority, but I have to keep it as a priority because it's part of the gig. So I'm going through a whole mindset shift right now with freelancing, finding that boundary, finding like the moments to work, the moments to also do something else, like creatively. I started learning the ukulele again. But I need to force myself sometimes to do those things. I know it's going to be good for me, like mentally, to learn an instrument, but I do like, I don't know, I just constantly want to work, and I feel like I need to stop myself from that.
Right. My wife is so good at that because she makes lists, which I'm trying to learn that as well, of like the top 5 they need to finish that day. And I'm terrible. I would do something and I would just like stop that because I see something else, right? At the end of the day, you haven't really finished anything. You're like, what's going on here? But yeah, making the list is so important. I feel like the mixing of the life together of your work, creativity, if you can balance that out somehow, that it all kind of mesh very well, then that's peace, right? Where you can shut it off at a certain time. The idea of what we're talking about, creativity and balance and family and work and choices, yeah, I feel like it all kind of culminates um, to what a documentary film is, right? Which brings us to Chingona. So maybe I can just start it off that
Yeah.
I was in Mexico City on the magazine job to photograph female boxers for a story. And I met all these amazing female boxers. Ana Maria Torres was one of them. She's a champion. She had gyms all over Mexico City. Kika Chavez was one of them. And, from that meeting, I became friends with them and started thinking, God, there's such a bigger story here than just being taking pictures. That's when I contacted Karin. I kind of thought about it. I go, Karin, there's a project I want to do. Do you want to jump on this? And Karin and I have been talking about making films and, moving to that direction. And she said yes. So that just kind of snowballed the whole thing. We went back to Mexico City. We met 10, 12, 15 boxers to kind of cast. And then from there, the idea of documentary filmmaking, which just to tie it up to what we're talking about, it's like magnified by 1,000 of, being determined to do it. Of course, we picked a story that we have to fly to, which is harder, right? And yeah, I mean, I speak a little Spanish, but I'm not really uh, fluent, because I'm Filipino, so we have a lot of Spanish, and my culture is very close to Spanish. We were colonized with the Spaniards, like the Mexicans, for centuries, really. So I feel very at home in Mexico City, or Mexico in general. But having said that, you know, I, I think it helped me as a director because I listen very intently when I'm filming. I'm trying to follow the conversations. So I'm very kind of really focused, more focused, I guess, in a way, to see what's going on, see your facial expressions, to see what's going, if there's something important happening. But yeah, documentaries, I love documentaries, but it's a pain in the butt. It's not a script to follow, right? You're filming everything you can as much as you can in moments that there are moments you can't film because you're not there. Very frustrating. And you don't even really know if you have a story, right? Because there's no map in the way. There's no plan because you're following the subjects, not knowing, hoping that there's a story. You know there's a story, but you don't know if they're going to open themselves up to you to show it or show enough of it that you could create an arc. But man, it's just very gratifying and satisfying too.
I mean, and the subject that we decided to tackle, the women are really so inspiring because for them, it's a way out of poverty. And they're dealing with extremes of machismo in their culture. So the people we've met have been incredible. We've had so many highs, a few lows, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. I mean, it's really been a fantastic experience. Though, unfortunately, the one downside is that when we started, it was kind of the golden age of documentary filmmaking. And there's so much money available and so many grants. And like anything, right now it's going through an ebb. There have been a lot of cuts, especially for funding the arts. But again, I think people who hang in there and persevere, like eventually things will happen. So you just have to really remember that because nothing comes easily, and half the time you'll learn more just during the process than reaching, you can't be like, we have this end goal, because I think the entire experience has been so enlightening and so, I've learned so much. So I wouldn't take any of that away.
Yeah. Yeah. And there is so much to unpack about the reality of documentary filmmaking, but we are unfortunately running out of time because we had so many other cool things to talk about. I feel like we almost need to do a part 2 just to unpack everything that is going on with like the reality of documentary filmmaking.
I mean, it's a whole conversation about, the nuts and bolts of documentary filmmaking. There's so many nuances that we can talk about of that world. Right. I mean, of course, we're new to that as well. So we're learning as we go. But it's next time we can talk about that.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for opening up and telling it also how it is and for bringing up the cycles and that there is hope. Like, I feel like this conversation was a very hopeful conversation. So I really appreciate you coming on this podcast and spending time with us today.
Thanks, Jessie.
Of course.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. That's this episode of No Map Included. If any of this sounds familiar, then you're probably in the middle of something too. A career shifting, an identity you're still growing into, a chapter that hasn't resolved yet. That's exactly where these conversations live. So, there is no single way through this, but there is a lot to learn from other people who have. Don't forget to subscribe to No Map Included, and I'll see you next time.